The year was 2347. Humanity stood on the brink, its former glory reduced to a single fragile cradle of life, Earth. The galaxy, once teeming with thriving civilizations, had fallen silent. Across the vast reaches of space, a creeping darkness, known only as the Void, devoured star systems, leaving nothing but cold emptiness in its wake. Entire civilizations had vanished, their achievements and histories wiped away by an unseen force. As the galaxies died, Earth became the last known beacon of life, its cities standing as a testament to a once great species. On Earth, the luminaries, an elite council of Earth's surviving leaders, scientists, and visionaries, gathered in the sterile, white halls of the Sanctuary of Hope. This place was a monument to humanity's resilience, a place where the last embers of civilization burned bright, despite the crushing darkness that had long since overtaken the stars. Captain Amelia Duval stood at the center of a room filled with tension. She was young, only 35, but the weight of her responsibility was immense. As the commander of the Eternal Horizon, the flagship of Earth's desperate final expedition, she had been tasked with something no one had ever thought possible, finding a way to stop the Void. Yet it wasn't a simple mission of survival. The Void wasn't just a natural disaster. It was a living, intelligent force, and it was on the hunt. "We can't keep running from this," Duval's voice echoed in the silence of the room. She was the only one standing, her posture rigid, eyes sharp as they met the others. "If we don't act now, if we don't find out who or what is behind the Void, Earth will be next." The luminaries exchanged uneasy glances. They knew what she spoke was true, but none of them had any real answers. For decades, Earth's brightest minds had tried to understand the Void, to comprehend its nature, but it was an enigma. A black hole, yes, but not a natural one. Something worse, something deliberate, and now it was spreading toward them. Earth's time was running out, but the problem was there was no clear solution. That was until the signal came. It had begun as a whisper, a faint, rhythmic pulse, as if the cosmos itself were trying to speak. At first, the signal was dismissed as cosmic background noise, a byproduct of the Void's expanding reach. But when Earth's most advanced computational systems analyzed it, they realized something terrifying. It was a message. The pulse followed a mathematical pattern, too precise to be anything but deliberate. And, more disturbingly, it originated from the heart of the Void itself. The first report came through the quantum receiver. Dr. Elias Rahn, Earth's foremost scientist, was the one to crack the pattern. The signal wasn't a random burst of radiation. It was a transmission from a source far older than anything Earth had ever encountered. What shocked everyone even more was the nature of the message. It was a repeating sequence, like an invitation. It echoed across the stars, seemingly reaching back through time itself. A beacon, and it was coming from somewhere, or someone, deep within the Void. "How is this possible?" Duval whispered to herself as she studied the signal's patterns. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. "This doesn't make sense." The others leaned in, their eyes glued to the holographic display that illuminated the chamber. The signal's origins seemed to be human, faint echoes of the ancient species that once lived among the stars. But these signals had been lost for centuries, potentially millennia. How could this be? What ancient, hidden force had left a trail across the blackness? Ron turned to Duval, his expression grave. "This signal, it's not just a message. It's a distress call, from someone who knew what the Void truly is." The room fell into stunned silence. The message wasn't merely a plea for help, it was a warning. Duval felt her stomach twist. Earth's last hope might lie in the very heart of the darkness, where no ship, no probe, no human had dared venture. "We have to go," she said finally, her voice steady but filled with a fierce determination. "Whatever this is, it's our only chance. The Void, it's not just killing us, it's hunting us. But if we can learn its secrets, if we can find who sent this message, maybe, just maybe, we can turn the tide. Her words, though filled with resolve, did nothing to quell the mounting fear. They had no way of knowing whether the message was a lifeline or a trap. But for the first time in centuries, humanity had a lead, a sliver of hope. The pulse was calling them, and they couldn't afford to ignore it. The expedition would begin, and with it, Earth's fate would either be sealed or rewritten. As Duval turned toward the door, a thought gnawed at her. They were not just going to explore the void. They were going to confront it, and they had no idea what awaited them in the darkness. Captain Amelia Duval stood on the bridge of the eternal horizon, staring out into the vast blackness that stretched before her. The stars that once illuminated the night sky now appeared distant and faint, swallowed by the endless void that was creeping closer to Earth with every passing day. The ship's sleek, dark exterior gleamed under the artificial lights of the command deck, its advanced engines humming softly, ready to launch humanity's final expedition into the unknown. Beside her, Dr. Elias Rahn, the scientist who had decoded the mysterious signal, was finalizing the calculations on the ship's navigation system. His face was pale, his eyes red-rimmed from the sleepless nights spent analyzing the data. Like the rest of them, he knew that this mission wasn't just a matter of discovery, it was survival. But despite his brilliance, there were no guarantees. No one knew what lay beyond the threshold of the void. No one knew what they were truly facing. "Captain," Roan said, his voice tight with uncertainty. "The signal we intercepted. It's leading us to a place no one has ever returned from. We could be walking into the very heart of the storm." Duval glanced at him, her jaw set. "I know, Elias, but we don't have a choice." Her voice held an edge of steel. "Earth's future depends on this. We either find a way to stop the void, or we vanish with the rest of the galaxy." The others on the bridge were silent. A handful of military officers, engineers, and scientists filled the room, each one bracing themselves for what lay ahead. It was a mix of fear and hope, a volatile combination that seemed to hang in the air like static. Everyone knew the risks. Everyone understood the stakes. But there was also an unspoken bond, a shared resolve to take the plunge into the unknown. "All systems are ready for launch," Lieutenant Kira Mendoza, the ship's chief tactical officer, announced. She was young, only in her late 20s, but her calm demeanor in the face of danger had earned her the respect of the crew. "We can leave at any moment, Captain. Earth's time is running out." Duval nodded, her gaze lingering on the view ahead. Earth was a small blue orb, fragile and alone, suspended against the backdrop of infinite darkness. It was a heartbreaking sight, one that reminded her of just how much was at stake. She inhaled deeply and then turned to face her crew. "Prepare for launch. We head into the void." The words hung in the air for a moment, almost too heavy to speak. As the crew moved to their stations, Duval felt the weight of her decision settle on her shoulders. They were venturing into a place where the laws of reality itself seemed to break down. Some believed the void was a cosmic anomaly, an expanding black hole that devoured everything in its path. Others, like Ron, believed it was something more, an intelligent entity that fed on entire civilizations. Whatever it was, it had no mercy. As the eternal horizon broke free from Earth's orbit, Duval couldn't shake the nagging feeling that they were being watched. It wasn't just the eerie stillness of space or the sense of dread that filled the air. It was something deeper, a primal instinct that told her the void knew they were coming. It had been waiting. They traveled for weeks, the ship cutting through the endless expanse of stars, every crew member working tirelessly to ensure the ship remained on course. But despite the advanced technology they had at their disposal, there was a creeping feeling of unease, an oppressive weight that pressed in from all sides. The stars seemed to flicker and dim as they approached the edge of the void, and strange, unexplainable occurrences began to manifest aboard the ship. At first, it was small things, an engine reading that seemed to reset itself, data points that didn't match up, a flickering light here and there. But then they started hearing voices. Soft murmurs, indistinguishable but insistent, coming from the ship's intercom system. When they played back the audio, all they could hear was static. And yet, sometimes, the voices sounded almost familiar, echoes of conversations from the past. "It's just the stress of space travel," Roan said, though his voice lacked conviction. "We're approaching the edge of the void, and the energy disturbances could be messing with the ship's systems." But Duval knew better. Something was wrong. They were being pulled toward something, not by gravitational forces, but by a force far more insidious. The signal had led them to this moment, and the closer they got, the more the ship seemed to respond to its presence. The crew had grown quiet, their faces drawn with exhaustion, their minds clouded by an unease that none could shake. Finally, the eternal horizon entered the fringe of the void, a vast, featureless expanse of darkness. It was like the night sky had been blotted out by a thick, impenetrable fog. All the stars had vanished, swallowed whole by the expanding abyss. Duval gripped the armrests of her chair as the ship began to shudder. They were crossing the threshold, and whatever lay beyond was now within their reach. The signal had led them here, but now they were entering the unknown, and in the depths of the void, no one could hear them scream. The transition into the void was like stepping into a different dimension entirely. The comforting hum of the Eternal Horizon's engines seemed to vanish, swallowed by an unnatural silence. The ship's instruments flickered intermittently, the data feeds glitching as they ventured deeper into the blackness. There was no light, no stars, just the oppressive weight of the infinite dark pressing in on them from all sides. Even the artificial gravity on the ship felt distorted, as though reality itself was beginning to warp under the void's influence. Captain Duval stood at the front of the bridge, her hands clasped behind her back, her eyes locked on the dark expanse ahead. The chill of the air wasn't just physical, it seeped into her bones, leaving her with an unsettling sense of unease. The silence was deafening, and every creak of the ship felt like a whisper from the abyss. "Status report, Mendoza," Duval said, her voice steady but taut with tension. Lieutenant Mendoza glanced at the various panels around her. "Everything's stable, Captain, but the data's getting weird. Our navigation system is picking up fluctuations. I can't make sense of it. It's like the void is playing tricks on our instruments." Duval's jaw tightened. They had expected the journey to be perilous, but nothing could have prepared them for the strange phenomena they were encountering. The ship's internal clocks had started running out of sync, and the stars had all but disappeared. It was as if time itself was unspooling, leaving them adrift in a place where nothing made sense. "Keep me updated," Duval said, turning her gaze back to the viewport. As they continued to plunge into the void, the ship's sensors began picking up strange signals. At first, they thought it was just static interference, but the patterns were too consistent, too deliberate. Dr. Roan had been monitoring the data closely, and now his voice cracked through the radio. "Captain, you need to see this," Roan said, urgency lacing his words. "The signal, it's changing." Duval moved swiftly to the science station, where Roan had pulled up the data feed. The rhythmic pulse they had tracked from Earth was now louder, more pronounced, but something was different. The signal was no longer just a distress call, it was communicating. There were patterns embedded in the signal, subtle variations that hinted at a more complex, intentional structure. "I think it's trying to tell us something," Ron muttered, his face pale. "It's not just a message, it's a map, a path." Duval's pulse quickened. "A map to what?" Roan hesitated, looking at the swirling data on his screen. I don't know, but this isn't just a signal, it's guiding us." The ship began to shift again, this time with a sudden jolt. A deep, low rumble reverberated through the hull, sending tremors down Duval's spine. On the view screen, the void seemed to undulate, as though something vast and unseen was moving within it. It was subtle at first, barely perceptible, a ripple in the fabric of space itself. but it grew rapidly, distorting the darkness ahead. "Get us out of here," Mendoza barked, her hands flying over the controls. But the ship wouldn't respond. It felt as though they had crossed an invisible line, an inescapable threshold that had bound them to the void. "Shields are failing," the engineering officer called out, panic creeping into their voice. Duval's mind raced. The ship's systems were becoming increasingly unreliable, as if the void itself was unmaking the laws of physics that had once governed their existence. There was no clear way to fight it, no way to escape. The only thing they could do was follow the signal. "Ron," Duval said, her voice firm despite the rising panic, "can we track the source of the signal?" Ron's fingers flew across the console. "Yes, but it's moving. Not like we are, though. It's almost like it's waiting for us." The air in the bridge seemed to thicken. The pressure was unbearable. The crew was silent, each member lost in their thoughts, the weight of the journey pressing down on them. Duval felt a chill creep down her spine. "Is it alive?" Before Ron could respond, the rumbling intensified. A flash of light pierced the void ahead. It was sharp and bright, too bright to be natural, and for a moment, it was as if the void itself were alive, bending and twisting in reaction to something unseen. The ship lurched violently as though it were caught in an invisible gravitational pull. "We're not in control," Mendoza shouted, struggling with the controls as the ship was pulled toward the light. "Captain, we need to do something." But Duval could only watch as the eternal horizon was dragged deeper into the darkness. She had no answers, only instincts that screamed at her to trust the signal, to follow it to its source. And then, as the ship closed in on the light, it happened. The edges of the void began to distort even further, stretching outward in strange geometries. Shapes, large and moving, appeared in the distance. At first, they looked like ships, ancient, massive vessels, impossibly large, drifting through the darkness. But these ships weren't empty. They were covered in strange, glowing rooms, like the remnants of an alien civilization, long lost to time. Captain Duval's breath caught in her throat. The signal was leading them to something, and now they were on the verge of discovering what had remained hidden for eons. Something ancient, something terrifying, and it was waiting for them. The journey had just begun. The eternal horizon lurched again as the ship was drawn closer to the source of the light. The rumbling beneath their feet had now settled into a haunting, rhythmic pulse, almost like the heartbeat of something ancient and enormous. Outside, the darkness of the void had warped further, and the once faint shapes of ships, massive and sprawling, became clearer. They weren't just ships, they were a fleet, suspended in the empty abyss, motionless and hauntingly silent. Captain Duval stood at the front of the bridge, her eyes locked on the growing fleet of ancient vessels. They were colossal, their hulls etched with unfamiliar symbols and covered in a web of glowing greenish lines that seemed to shimmer and pulse as though they were alive. The designs were complex and organic, twisting in ways that defied the logic of human engineering. Some ships seemed to be constructed from materials that didn't belong to this galaxy, fragments of black stone that absorbed light, glimmering metals that seemed to shift and bend in the void. "They're not dead," Duval muttered, her voice barely a whisper. "They're waiting, but waiting for what?" The silence on the bridge was palpable. The crew was transfixed by the sight. The fleet stretched out as far as the eye could see, each ship seeming to bleed into the next, forming an armada that filled the very fabric of space. But there was something unsettling about their stillness. Despite their size and apparent age, these ships didn't seem like relics of a long-forgotten past. They felt as if they were frozen in time, waiting for something to stir them back to life. Lieutenant Mendoza's fingers moved rapidly across the controls, trying to recalibrate the sensors to get more detailed scans of the ships. "Captain, these vessels are huge. The energy readings, it's off the charts, but it's not like anything we've ever seen. No radiation, no heat signatures, just pure, untraceable energy. They're emitting something, a kind of field. Are they hostile? Duval asked, her eyes narrowing as she focused on the eerie glow emanating from the ships. I don't know, Mendoza replied, her voice tinged with uncertainty. It's as if they're dormant, but there's a presence, a weight to them. Almost like they're aware of us. At that moment, the signal pulsed again, a deep, resonant tone that vibrated through the hull of the ship. It was so strong that it felt like it was pressing against their chests, an invisible force that made it hard to breathe. Duval instinctively reached for her console, her fingers brushing against the display. The signal was clearer now, more distinct, and its message had shifted. No longer was it just a distress call, it was an invitation. We're being called, Duval said quietly. Her heart pounded in her chest as the words settled in. These ships, they are waiting for us to approach. Dr. Elias Rohn stepped forward, his face pale, his hands trembling. That signal, Captain, it's coming from inside one of those ships. I think they want us to board. Duval turned to face Ron, her mind racing. If the signal was coming from within one of the ships, they could uncover the truth about the void. They might finally learn what had caused the destruction of the galaxy, what had erased so many civilizations. But there was something deeply unsettling about the idea of entering one of those ships. They had no idea what was waiting for them inside, what kind of beings or intelligence was behind the signal. Can we communicate with them? Duval asked, her voice firm despite the uncertainty gnawing at her insides. I'm not sure, Rohn said, tapping furiously at his console. I can't decipher the language of the signal, but the pattern, it's more than just words. It's almost like a code, a blueprint, a key. Duval's gaze lingered on the largest of the ships, which seemed to glow with an unnatural light at its core. It was positioned at the center of the fleet, its shape more distinct than the others. It was larger, more intricate, as though it were the heart of the armada itself. Take us in, Mendoza, Duval ordered, her voice steady but carrying an edge of determination. We're going to that ship. Mendoza didn't hesitate. Aye, Captain, initiating course adjustments. The Eternal Horizon began to move, its engines pushing them toward the heart of the fleet. As they drew closer to the largest ship, Duval could feel the pressure mounting. The air in the bridge grew heavier, the walls of the ship vibrating slightly as though it, too, was aware of the approaching vessel. The crew watched in tense silence, knowing that every moment brought them closer to something they couldn't fully understand. The massive ship before them seemed to shimmer in the void, its surface covered in strange markings, intricate patterns that glowed faintly. They could now make out the size of its docking ports, enormous openings large enough to fit the Eternal Horizon. Should we prepare for immediate boarding? Mendoza asked, her eyes darting to Duval. If this is a trap. I'm not turning back now, Duval interrupted. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were filled with a cold resolve. We've come too far to turn back. We either find the answers we're looking for, or we never leave this place. As the Eternal Horizon approached the docking port, the ship's systems began to act erratically once more. Lights flickered and strange hums echoed through the corridors. But Duval kept her focus on the ship in front of them, the signal pulling them forward like a magnet. The void had led them here for a reason. Now they would learn what secrets lay within the silent ancient fleet. And in the stillness of the void, they would face whatever waited for them beyond the edge of reality. The Eternal Horizon drifted closer to the docking port of the massive ship. The air was thick with tension, every crew member silently preparing for what lay ahead. The looming vessel, unlike anything humanity had ever seen, seemed to pulse with life, its surface alive with glowing symbols that shimmered and twisted as though reacting to their approach. The ship's hull gleamed with an ethereal sheen, bending the light around it like liquid metal, as though it existed partially outside the laws of physics. Docking sequence engaged, Mendoza announced, her voice tight but resolute. We're aligning with the port now, Captain. Duval's fingers tightened on the armrests of her chair. The closer they came, the more she felt a gnawing sense of inevitability in her chest. They had crossed the point of no return. Whatever awaited them inside, there was no turning back. It was a thought that haunted her every step, but it was also the only path left for humanity. Outside, the massive docking port opened slowly, as if it were expecting them, a vast gateway into the unknown. As the eternal horizon passed through the threshold, the ship's systems hummed with energy, and the oppressive silence that had followed them through the void seemed to amplify. It felt as though the very atmosphere within the port had changed, growing heavier, more suffocating. Entering the docking bay now, Mendoza said, her voice strained. It's like the entire ship is alive, Captain. The entire area is reacting to our presence. Duval remained silent, her gaze fixed on the view screen. The eternal horizon slipped into the docking bay, the great vessel's shadow enveloping them. The bay was cavernous, its interior filled with an almost eerie quiet. It was unlike any hangar or docking bay Duval had ever seen. There were no familiar markings, no signs of human engineering. Instead, the walls were smooth and curved, covered with the same glowing, organic symbols that adorned the ship's exterior. The air within the bay felt stagnant, as if it had been untouched for millennia. The ship came to a gentle halt, and the crew began their preparations. The gravity within the docking bay was normal, if slightly muted, but there was an unmistakable sensation that they had entered a different realm entirely. Time itself seemed to warp here, bending and stretching in ways Duval couldn't explain. "We've arrived," Duval said, turning to her team. "Prepare for boarding. Roan, you're with me. Mendoza, you stay in contact with the ship. If anything goes wrong, we need to be able to leave in an instant." Captain," Mendoza replied, though her voice held a tremor of uncertainty. Duval nodded, then motioned for Roan to follow her. As they moved toward the airlock, the crew gathered their gear, breathing masks, weapons, and scanners. They didn't know what they would face inside the mysterious ship, but they couldn't afford to be unprepared. The airlock door hissed open with an unsettling groan. The interior beyond was dark, save for the eerie green glow that filtered through the walls and ceilings. The faint hum of the ship's energy systems echoed throughout the chamber, vibrating in the bones of the crew as they stepped forward into the unknown. Duval led the way, her every step measured, her eyes darting from side to side, scanning the environment for anything unusual. The walls of the ship seemed to shift as they moved, their strange symbols flickering and rearranging before their eyes, as though the structure itself was alive, adjusting to their presence. Roan was scanning his equipment, his face pale. "This is unlike anything I've ever encountered. The energy readings are impossible. It's like the ship is not bound by conventional physics. The way it generates power, it's not from any known source." "Stay focused," Duval ordered, her voice low but firm. "We need answers, Elias. Humanity's future depends on this." They moved deeper into the ship, the corridors narrowing and twisting in ways that defied any sort of conventional architecture. There were no doors, no obvious means of passage, just seamless walls that appeared to open on their own as they approached. It felt as though the ship was acknowledging them, guiding them deeper into its core. As they moved further in, Duval began to feel a strange sensation in her chest, a pressure, as if something was pushing in from all sides. The signal pulsed stronger now, and the walls themselves seemed to hum in response. She could feel it, the call. It was a presence, something vast and ancient, reaching out to them through the very fabric of space. A sudden sound cut through the silence, an echo faint at first, but growing louder. Footsteps. Unearthly, echoing footsteps that seemed to reverberate through the entire ship. "Did you hear that?" Roan whispered, his voice tight with fear. Duval held up a hand, signaling for silence. The footsteps grew louder, now unmistakable. And then, out of the shadows, something emerged. A figure, tall, impossibly tall, stepped forward from the depths of the ship. Its shape was hard to define at first, a silhouette of shifting darkness, its features obscured by the same glowing symbols that adorned the walls. But as it moved closer, Duval could see more details. Its body was humanoid, but its limbs were unnaturally long, its movements graceful but unsettling, as if it were a being not entirely of this world. The figure stopped in front of them, its head tilting slightly, as if studying them. Its eyes, or what passed for eyes, glowed with the same eerie light as the rest of the ship, flickering with a strange intelligence. Duval's breath caught in her throat. "Who, or what are you?" she whispered, her voice steady but filled with awe. The figure remained silent, but its gaze never wavered. And then, in a voice that echoed within her mind, it spoke. Not in words, but in emotions, in images, visions that flooded Duval's consciousness in an instant. "We are the Watchers. We have waited for you." The answer reverberated in her mind, leaving her both terrified and mesmerized. The void had led them here, and now the Watchers had awakened. Duval stood in the shadow of the Watcher, her heart still pounding from the encounter. The overwhelming sensation of power coursing through her veins had subsided, but the weight of its significance lingered like a storm cloud. The room around them had grown even darker, the ethereal glow of the ship now a dull, pulsating light, as though the vessel itself was preparing for the impending conflict. Roan was beside her, his expression grim as he scanned his equipment. "I've been trying to process the data, Captain, but it doesn't make sense. The light, it's not a technology, not something we can just replicate or reverse engineer. It's something innate, something tied to us, to humanity." Duval nodded, though the realization weighed heavily on her. The Watcher's words echoed in her mind. "The power lies within you all." But how? What had they been missing? Humanity had always looked outward, seeking answers in the stars, but this was a force that originated from within them, buried deep in their biology, perhaps even in their very consciousness. How could something so profound be so elusive? "We need to understand what the light is, and how we can unlock it," Duval said, her voice steady despite the growing uncertainty in her chest. "This ship, the Watcher, it's all part of something greater. We need to find the key to awakening it." Roan's brow furrowed. "The Watcher mentioned something about a path, but we don't even know where to start." Duval looked back toward the darkened corridor. It seemed endless, stretching far into the bowels of the ship, its walls covered in the same intricate symbols that danced across its surface. She felt an instinctive pull toward the darkness, as though it were guiding her. But she wasn't sure if it was the ship itself or the knowledge she had been given that was pushing her forward. "We move forward. There's only one way to find the answers. We follow the path." Without another word, Duval began walking toward the depths of the ship. Roan fell in step beside her, his thoughts clearly racing. The rest of the crew followed quietly, the only sound the soft hum of the ship's systems. As they moved deeper into the vessel, the strange sensation in the air grew more pronounced. It was like a presence, unseen but ever watchful, pressing in from all sides. The corridors twisted and turned, and Duval couldn't shake the feeling that they were being guided, led to something specific. The deeper they ventured, the more the ship seemed to react to their presence. The symbols on the walls glowed brighter, pulsating in rhythm with their footsteps, as though they were unlocking something. Suddenly, they reached a massive chamber, an open space unlike anything they had encountered. The room was vast, its ceiling lost in darkness above them. In the center of the room stood a colossal obelisk, carved from some material that shimmered with an iridescent glow. The obelisk radiated an otherworldly energy, its surface covered in the same intricate patterns they had seen all over the ship. But this was different. It felt ancient yet alive, as though it were the very heart of the ship itself. Duval stepped forward, drawn by the force emanating from the obelisk. As she approached, the symbols on the walls flared to life. forming an intricate web of light that spiraled toward the center of the room. The air crackled with energy, and Duval felt the unmistakable pressure of the ship's power building around them. "This is it," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. "This is what we've been looking for." The rest of the crew gathered around her, their eyes wide with wonder. But there was something else in the air now, something darker. The Watcher's warning echoed in Duval's mind again. "The void is closing in. If you do not awaken the light soon, all will be lost." She turned to Roan. "Can you make sense of any of this?" Roan was already scanning the obelisk, his eyes darting across the symbols. It's like a key, Captain. A key to unlocking the light. But it's incomplete. There's something missing. Some part of it doesn't align with the rest of the ship." Duval frowned. "What does that mean? Is it damaged?" "No," Roan said slowly. "It's more like the ship is waiting for something from us. It's like the last piece of the puzzle is still out of our reach." Before Duval could respond, the ground beneath them trembled. It wasn't the usual vibrations of the ship. This was different, like a disturbance in the very fabric of reality itself. The walls of the chamber seemed to pulse, the symbols shifting and warping. The air grew thick with an oppressive weight, and Duval's breath caught in her throat. "We're not alone," Mendoza said from behind them, her voice tight with fear. A dark shape appeared at the edge of the room, moving slowly, deliberately. Duval's heart raced as she turned to face it. The shape was large, much larger than anything human, and its presence was suffocating. It was as if the void itself had entered the room, a living shadow that twisted and stretched, its form constantly shifting. "The void," Duval whispered. The figure stopped, its dark presence filling the space. She could feel the malevolent intelligence radiating from it, the same presence that had haunted them since the beginning of their journey. It was the harbinger of destruction, the force that sought to consume everything, and it had found them. "You are too late," the void's voice boomed inside Duval's mind, sending waves of cold dread through her body. "The cycle is already in motion." The Watcher's warning had been right. The time had run out, and now they were trapped in the very heart of the storm. The oppressive weight of the void hung in the air like a suffocating fog, its presence pressing in from all sides. Duval's breath came in shallow gasps as she faced the dark, shifting shape before her. The being loomed larger with every passing second, an entity born from the very essence of destruction. It was the embodiment of annihilation, a sentient force that devoured everything in its path. The air crackled with the intensity of its presence, and Duval's mind reeled from the overwhelming pressure. She could feel it clawing at her consciousness, seeking to twist and erase her thoughts, to strip away her will. But there was something else too, something within her, buried deep beneath the weight of fear and doubt. It was the power the Watcher had spoken of, the light. "You are too late," the void's voice reverberated in Duval's mind, a harsh, mocking tone that resonated with ancient cruelty. "The cycle has already begun. You cannot stop what is inevitable." Duval's fists clenched at her sides. Her body shook, but not from fear. No, this was something different. It was power, raw and untamed, thrumming within her veins, begging to be unleashed. She could feel it now, the light, pulsing in time with her heartbeat. It was alive, waiting for her to awaken it. "You're wrong," Duval said, her voice steady, though every fiber of her being screamed for release. "The cycle doesn't have to end in destruction. Humanity will not bend to the will of the void." The figure before her shifted, its form rippling as if it were made of smoke. Its eyes, if they could even be called eyes, glowed with a cold, soulless fire. The void laughed, a sound that was more a vibration in the air than anything tangible. "You still don't understand," it purred. "There is no escaping the inevitable. You are insignificant in the face of true power, all of you err." The void's words were cut off as Duval's mind surged with a sudden clarity. The light, the power within her, she understood now. She didn't have to fight the void on its terms, in its realm of destruction. Humanity's strength, the key to their survival, wasn't just about raw power. It was about creation. The light wasn't a weapon. It was a force of life, of hope, of renewal. Without warning, Duval stepped forward, reaching out with both hands toward the dark figure. Her mind was filled with the ancient knowledge the Watcher had shared with her. She felt the light stirring within her, rising up to meet the void. The ship around them thrummed with energy, as though it too recognized what was happening, aligning itself with the force she was about to unleash. The void recoiled, sensing the shift in the air. "What are you doing?" It growled, its voice suddenly filled with something akin to fear. Duval's hands glowed with radiant light, the symbols on her skin pulsing in time with the energy that surged through her. She could feel the ship responding to her, its power aligning with her own. The obelisk in the center of the room hummed with a bright, blinding light. The air crackled with energy as the two forces, light and dark, clashed in a maelstrom of cosmic power. "I am humanity's last stand," Duval said, her voice resonating with a newfound strength. "We will not fall, not to you, not to the void." In that moment, the light flared brighter than the sun, a blinding wave of energy that swept through the chamber. The void screamed, its form warping and distorting as it was pushed back by the force of creation. The ship shuddered violently as the power grew, the light radiating outward in all directions, pushing against the encroaching darkness. For a moment, Duval felt as though she were on the edge of the universe itself, standing at the crossroads between creation and oblivion. The void lashed out, its tendrils of shadow snaking toward her, but they dissolved in the presence of the light. The darkness screamed, its form fragmenting and dissipating, the very fabric of its being unraveling as the force of creation overwhelmed it. Then, with a final deafening roar, the void collapsed in on itself, vanishing into nothingness. The room fell silent, the oppressive pressure lifting in an instant. Duval stood there, panting, her body trembling from the exertion. The light that had been flowing through her slowly faded, leaving behind a lingering warmth. For a long moment, no one spoke. The crew stood frozen, their eyes wide with disbelief at the sight of the void's complete and utter annihilation. The dark shape that had once loomed over them was gone, erased from existence. They had done it. They had stopped the unstoppable. Duval looked down at her hands, her mind still reeling from the intensity of what had just happened. She had awakened something inside herself, inside humanity. The light wasn't just a force, it was a reflection of their potential, their will to survive, to create, to endure. It had been within them all along. "We did it," Roan whispered, his voice filled with awe. Duval nodded, though she couldn't bring herself to speak just yet. There was so much to process, so much they had yet to understand about the power they had just tapped into. But for now, the threat had been vanquished. The void was gone. Humanity had emerged victorious. Against all odds, they had proven that their strength lay not in their ability to destroy, but in their ability to create, to protect the light against the dark. And the galaxy, now safe from the shadows that once threatened to engulf it, stood on the brink of a new beginning. Duval looked out toward the distant stars, a sense of hope swelling within her chest. The future was uncertain, but humanity had found its place in the cosmos, and with the light, they would guide the way. The oppressive weight of the void hung in the air like a suffocating fog, its presence pressing in from all sides. Duval's breath came in shallow gasps as she faced the dark, shifting shape before her. The being loomed larger with every passing second, an entity born from the very essence of destruction. It was the embodiment of annihilation, a sentient force that devoured everything in its path. The air crackled with the intensity of its presence, and Duval's mind reeled from the overwhelming pressure. She could feel it clawing at her consciousness, seeking to twist and erase her thoughts, to strip away her will. But there was something else too, something within her, buried deep beneath the weight of fear and doubt. It was the power the Watcher had spoken of, the light. "You are too late," the void's voice reverberated in Duval's mind. a harsh, mocking tone that resonated with ancient cruelty. The cycle has already begun. You cannot stop what is inevitable. Duval's fists clenched at her sides. Her body shook, but not from fear. No, this was something different. It was power, raw and untamed, thrumming within her veins, begging to be unleashed. She could feel it now, the light, pulsing in time with her heartbeat. It was alive, waiting for her to awaken it. "You're wrong," Duval said, her voice steady, though every fiber of her being screamed for release. The cycle doesn't have to end in destruction. Humanity will not bend to the will of the void. The figure before her shifted, its form rippling as if it were made of smoke. Its eyes, if they could even be called eyes, glowed with a cold, soulless fire. The void laughed, a sound that was more a vibration in the air than anything tangible. "You still don't understand," it purred. "There is no escaping the inevitable. You are insignificant in the face of true power. All of you err." The void's words were cut off as Duval's mind surged with a sudden clarity. The light, the power within her, she understood now. She didn't have to fight the void on its terms, in its realm of destruction. Humanity's strength, the key to their survival, wasn't just about raw power. It was about creation. The light wasn't a weapon. It was a force of life, of hope, of renewal. Without warning, Duval stepped forward, reaching out with both hands toward the dark figure. Her mind was filled with the ancient knowledge the Watcher had shared with her. She felt the light stirring within her, rising up to meet the void. The ship around them thrummed with energy, as though it too recognized what was happening, aligning itself with the force she was about to unleash. The void recoiled, sensing the shift in the air. "What are you doing?" It growled, its voice suddenly filled with something akin to fear. Duval's hands glowed with radiant light, the symbols on her skin pulsing in time with the energy that surged through her. She could feel the ship responding to her, its power aligning with her own. The obelisk in the center of the room hummed with a bright, blinding light. The air crackled with energy as the two forces, light and dark, clashed in a maelstrom of cosmic power. "I am humanity's last stand," Duval said, her voice resonating with a newfound strength. "We will not fall, not to you, not to the void." In that moment, the light flared brighter than the sun, a blinding wave of energy that swept through the chamber. The void screamed, its form warping and distorting as it was pushed back by the force of creation. The ship shuddered violently as the power grew, the light radiating outward in all directions, pushing against the encroaching darkness. For a moment, Duval felt as though she were on the edge of the universe itself, standing at the crossroads between creation and oblivion. The void lashed out, its tendrils of shadow snaking toward her, but they dissolved in the presence of the light. The darkness screamed, its form fragmenting and dissipating, the very fabric of its being unraveling as the force of creation overwhelmed it. Then, with a final deafening roar, the void collapsed in on itself, vanishing into nothingness. The room fell silent, the oppressive pressure lifting in an instant. Duval stood there, panting, her body trembling from the exertion. The light that had been flowing through her slowly faded, leaving behind a lingering warmth. For a long moment, no one spoke. The crew stood frozen, their eyes wide with disbelief at the sight of the void's complete and utter annihilation. The dark shape that had once loomed over them was gone, erased from existence. They had done it. They had stopped the unstoppable. Duval looked down at her hands, her mind still reeling from the intensity of what had just happened. She had awakened something inside herself, inside humanity. The light wasn't just a force, it was a reflection of their potential, their will to survive, to create, to endure. It had been within them all along. "We did it," Roan whispered, his voice filled with awe. Duval nodded, though she couldn't bring herself to speak just yet. There was so much to process, so much they had yet to understand about the power they had just tapped into. But for now, the threat had been vanquished. The void was gone. Humanity had emerged victorious. Against all odds, they had proven that their strength lay not in their ability to destroy, but in their ability to create, to protect the light against the dark. And the galaxy, now safe from the shadows that once threatened to engulf it, stood on the brink of a new beginning. Duval looked out toward the distant stars, a sense of hope swelling within her chest. The future was uncertain, but humanity had found its place in the cosmos, and with the light, they would guide the way.